How often should you clean your muzzle brakes? This week on Mail Call Mondays. Mail Call Mondays is brought to you by MDT. If you need a chassis system for your precision rifle, check out mdttac.com. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Welcome to another Mail Call Mondays, and this Monday our question comes from Alan, and Alan asks, muzzle brakes, do you remove them after every range outing? Just for cleaning or not at all? If not at all, how do you go about cleaning a fouled up crown? Well, Alan, that's a great question, and it's one I've gotten a couple of times in the past, but I go about handling fouling at the crown a couple of different ways. Now, if we are talking about your standard blaster AR-15, I generally do not worry about it. I clean the inside of the muzzle brake or compensator and the crown when I do the regular barrel cleaning on those, which is very infrequently, just when we get to a really high round count, or if the fouling at the muzzle starts to affect the lockup of a suppressor. So those, I'm not worried about supreme accuracy at distance. I'm worried about reliability and function close up. So as long as they're functioning well, I don't generally worry about it. Now, when we switch over and we start talking about precision rifles, it's a little bit of a different issue, because on precision rifles, we really care about the condition of the crown, and the crown being that transition from the rifling inside the bore to the muzzle. So that transition is very critical, because that's the last thing the bullet touches before it goes on its journey downrange. It's the last piece of the system that we can control before environmental effects take over and decide where that bullet goes. So that transition from inside of the bore to free air has to be as clean as possible. That's another reason why we are so careful about having that nice chamfer from the rifling into free air, because it minimizes damage to it. And that's why you'll see on non-threaded muzzles, you'll see things like recessed target crowns. So we set that crown back further in the muzzle, and then we have a protective ring around the outside of it to protect it from getting banged up when it's in the bag or handling, or on the odd chance that you should drop a rifle. So we really want to maintain as concentric a crown as we possibly can when the bullet passes through it. So on a regular target crown, it's usually not that big of a deal once you have brushed and patched your bore, to take some bore solvent and just to wipe the muzzle, and that's generally all that's required. If you get a little bit of stubborn fouling on there, then you just take some bore solvent and a simple nylon brush, toothbrush kind of thing, and scrub it, and you can generally get all that fouling off. When we start to switch over to different kinds of muzzle brakes, things become a little bit more difficult. And there are a wide variety of brakes out there, so how quickly this occurs and how much of a problem it is really going to be dependent upon what brake you actually have on your rifle. There are some brakes out there that when you thread the brake onto the rifle, you can actually see the muzzle through the first port in the brake. If you can see the muzzle through the first port in the brake, and it's almost flush with the back surface of the brake, then it's usually pretty easy just to get in there with some solvent and with a GP brush, the small end of a general purpose cleaning brush, and get in there and scrub that and make sure it's nice and clean. If that's the case, then you can do it every time you clean the bore of your rifle. Now, I've talked about cleaning. We did a whole precision rifle cleaning video. I do not clean after every range trip, because for me, a fouled bore is a more consistent bore than a clean bore. Clean bore, your first shots are generally not going to impact perfectly with the rest of your group. So you have to get a little bit of fouling in there. How much fouling will depend upon how finely finished the interior of the bore is. But I will generally go 500, 600 rounds between cleaning on the bores of precision rifles. So at that point, it would be a good idea to clean that muzzle. Now, if we are looking at a different style of brake, for instance, I've got an Area 419 brake on here. The Area 419 brake uses an adapter. This is the Hellfire brake. It uses an adapter, and then the brake actually screws onto the adapter. This allows you to use one brake and swap it between a couple of different rifles fairly easily, as well as it makes mounting the brake very simple because there are no washers or shims or anything needed to time it. You just slide it on, it locks down on a taper, and then you tighten it so that the ports are level on the brake. It's really quick, really easy, and I have an adapter that allows me to take my Silencer Co. Hybrid 46 and just screw it right over the Hellfire adapter after I've removed the brake. So it's kind of a nice setup. But the Hellfire adapter that is on here actually stands a little bit proud of the muzzle. So I've got a little bit of a recess, and then the crown and the muzzle starts, and then the crown of the rifle. So what will happen over time is after we get that fouling blowing through there over and over again, we will start to build up a cone in there. The fouling will fill in the corners, and so we'll get this nice little cone. What kind of powder you're shooting, what kind of ammunition shooting will depend on how quickly that builds up. The cone in itself is not a problem. As long as it is perfectly concentric, we're still allowing the gases to flow evenly around the base of the bullet when it comes out of the crown. That will prevent the bullet from being upset. It will continue on its way as true as possible. The problem we run into is after numerous heat cycles, maybe you've cleaned the bore and you haven't cleaned that out, and a little bit of bore solvent has gotten in there and started to loosen it up. You can get chunks of that cone that will break out and get blown out of the muzzle. Now you have a very jagged, uneven section. Think about cutting pieces out of a pie. So now you have a section that's lower than another section, and the gases are going to want to go that direction. And that can upset the bullet as it comes out. It can cause turbulence inside the brake. There are all kinds of weird, funky things that can go on. So once we get it built up to the point where it's thick enough to start chunking off, we need to make sure that we get all of that stuff out of there. The easiest way to do it is just remove all your muzzle devices, take it back down to just the threaded muzzle, and then go ahead and stand it up in a small jar of bore cleaner. I actually have a pickle jar that I use for this, so I can fill bore solvent in the bottom of the pickle jar, stand it up in it, let it clean that stuff out. Now, how long you soak it is really going to be dependent upon what bore cleaners you use. Some of the super aggressive bore cleaners, you're not going to want to soak it for very long at all because it will really damage the barrel steel. And again, we don't want to damage that crown because that's really what we're trying to maintain. If it's not really horribly bad and you haven't gone a long distance between cleaning it or a long time between cleaning it, then you can just, again, take a nylon brush and scrub at it. Be careful with bronze brushes and never ever use a steel brush. Steel brushes are bad juju on it. If you want to use something like very, very fine steel wool, if you have a really aggressive problem, that might be okay, but I'm really hesitant to do anything with a material that's hard enough to actually scratch steel, because then we're going to start wearing that fine transition from the rifling to the muzzle. So with the actual brake itself, again, the Area 419 brake makes it easy because I can just spin this brake off and I can drop the whole brake in a vat of carbon solvent, or I can throw it in an ultrasonic cleaner, whatever, and clean the brake out. So at the same time that I'm cleaning the muzzle, I'm going to go ahead and clean the brake. Brakes pose a slightly different problem than the actual adapter or the crown itself. Brakes will start to build up chunks of carbon on those baffles. And once you build up enough on there, you really can't control when it breaks loose and what direction it goes. So you can blast chunks of carbon out of the side of your brake, which is not a good idea. I'm not so much worried about the chunks of carbon interfering with the bullet because usually you have a pretty high pressure column of air traveling in front of the bullet that's got to be pressurized and pushed out before the bullet actually makes its journey in. But it is possible that you could neglect it for so long that you get so much stuff built up in there that it starts to impinge a little bit on that bullet's path, and the bullet's having to wear a little bit out every time it goes through. The bigger problem is, much like the crown, depending on how tight your brake is, you may end up to where you have just enough of a piece of carbon on one side and no carbon, that chunk blew off on the other side. And again, that's causing the gases to move inconsistently around the bullet and can put some yaw into the bullet or tumble or all kinds of weird things. So it's probably a good idea to go ahead and get rid of all that stuff. I'm horrible about cleaning brakes. I tend to just let them go for a long period of time before I clean them, but I'm trying to get better at that because if you really are trying to drag out that last tenth out of it, that may have an effect on what you've got going on. Now, lastly, we'll talk about suppressors. Most rifle suppressors are completely sealed, and because rifle suppressors are completely sealed, I generally do not do anything to them. If it gets to the point where you think that the suppressor is just really hardening up, you've got a lot of carbon in there, the weight of the suppressor has changed significantly from when it was new, then I encourage you to refer to your manufacturer's owner's manual to tell you how to clean the suppressor. Some of them will just tell you to send the suppressor back to them. Others will tell you specific cleaning procedures. Others will tell you specifically what not to use because there are solvents out there that will damage certain materials that a manufacturer has used. And the number of materials and types of designs and suppressors is really so wide that I can't cover it here and do you guys any justice and tell you what to do and what to not do. So make sure you refer to your silencer's owner's manual or contact their customer service. Generally, they are more than happy to help you before you damage something. So it's something that needs to be done regularly as far as cleaning the brake and the muzzle. Suppressors, not so much. I will generally run them very long without being concerned about any of that. Clean the locking mechanism, clean the threads, clean everything that actually holds the suppressor on the gun, but don't worry about actually cleaning the suppressor until you really get a serious amount of rounds through the can. I don't like to just take this off and clean it after every range trip because then I can induce some variables and my cold bore shot is going to be off the next time I go out. If you are running shims to index your suppressor, using those same shims, you should be able to get it right back to where it needs to be. If your brake is held on with crush washers, then once you take that brake off, you're going to want to throw that crush washer away and use a new one. So keep a good number of crush washers on hand if that's the way it's set up. Although I would recommend just buying a shim kit, shimming the muzzle device to the correct alignment, and then you should be good to go when you take it off and reinstall it. That's going to do it for this Mail Call Mondays. If you guys have any questions or comments over anything we've covered on the video, please drop it in the comments section down below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you like the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and click that little bell icon to make sure you guys get notified when we release new content. If you want to help support the content that you know and love, please check us out over on Patreon. We would love to have you. And until next time, get out and shoot.